They feel they are competing right now in razor-thin margins in all 7 of the battlegrounds, Kristen.
Well, Gabe, speaking of those blue wall states, a Michigan Democrat told me they are nauseously optimistic. So gives you a sense of how close this race is.
Nauseously, yes.
Exactly.
We're hearing that a lot, too.
Yeah, it's how close this race is. Let's talk about
Guess what? The 20 to 35-year-old bros, they're not watching your television advertising either. And so your message to them has to be really refined. And Joe Rogan coming out as late as what he did, I think, doesn't really help them. And these are low-propensity voters that he's trying to target. But if you look at Trump's closing argument, he keeps stepping on his most important message, which is we're on the wrong track, we could fix it, the signs are right. But she gives a message of hope and the future, and we aren't going back. And I think that's valuable.
And now on the most important issue, look at that in bright pink there. 36% of voters say the most important issue to them is the state of democracy, not the economy as the top issue. That is right there at number 2 at 30%, the economy. Abortion, 14%, followed by immigration. Chuck?
Immigration's where?
We're not overreading into it, but we do want to tell you what we know as we're
directionally, if this is what this electorate is saying, you would be, and the Harris campaign will be ecstatic that that's the direction right now of where things are at.
Peter, talk to me about how the Harris campaign is feeling. I know you've been reporting all day about sort of their momentum and sort of maybe a changing of mood. They were feeling a bit more positive today.
Yeah, not just positive today. They've been feeling increasingly confident over the course of the last several days. Let's look at that favorability number, though, for a moment. And Kamala Harris, she performs better than both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. 4 points ahead of Donald Trump, 7 points ahead of Joe Biden. Right now, his number's coming down. Her number is particularly high in their view right now and higher than the man with whom she served, Joe Biden. So that's something they're feeling, I think, good about.
This is her alma mater at Howard University. The early indications, at least in the eyes of the Harris campaign, are good ones, specifically as it relates to the turnout among young voters.
Trump has said for the duration of this campaign, and especially in its closing days, that he believes the only way he could lose is if there is some kind of cheating out across these battleground states. We'll be watching to see what else he has to say about it tonight. Lester?
Okay, Garrett, thank you.
Again, not all of the vote is in. It is still early, but you can see Harris is underperforming in what is historically a blue county for Democrats. 56 for Joe Biden in 2020, 51 for Harris right now with 71% of the vote in. Again, it's still very early. Here, 56% in 2020 with 70% of the vote in. He's now at 59%, so he's overperforming. Again, still a lot of vote out. Still a lot to do here and kind of see where the vote is going. But those are good signs for the president.
Are we seeing anything unexpected, though?
So far, I do think the independent numbers are going to be really interesting to watch throughout the course of the night, especially in what we saw in those early national exit polls that a lot of people were identifying not as Republican, not as Democrat, but as independent. So that's a storyline to watch.
I always point to this number. All the votes not in. But if you were to call it right now, she is slightly underperforming. We'll wait for that other vote to come in. Guys, I want to show you something that's somewhat surprising. It may surprise you if you watch presidential elections and you follow election nights like this one. So Donald Trump right now with 73% of the vote in is up 55% in Miami-Dade County. Again, this is where Democrats find their votes in the state of Florida. Biden won Miami-Dade County by 53. They've now flipped those numbers. This is pretty astonishing when you think where Hillary Clinton was in 2016. 63%, 53. Now tonight, 55. Again, there's still 73% of the vote left. I do want to show you some potential good news, possibly for the Harris campaign, if they're watching tonight. So we're watching some of the vote come in Georgia. Remember, I told you more than 50% of the vote from Georgia is going to come around the Atlanta metro region. Let's take a look at some of these counties around Atlanta. 74% in Douglas County. Look at her number, 65%. Biden was at 61. So this means she's overperforming in the exact counties where she needs to find those votes. This is another big one. She's at 75%. Biden was at 69. So she's overperforming right now in some of these counties in the Atlanta metro region. Again, guys, this is where she has to drive up her vote. If she can expand the map, scale the Democratic vote there, they can hold Georgia. You remember this was such a close race 4 years ago. Any votes they can find in that Atlanta region is going to help them. Guys?
I think Democrats are going to look back at how we've not invested in Florida. Since the campaign I worked on, the Obama campaign, we've not invested in work Florida well.
Tom alluded to it with Miami-Dade, but I also looked at Hillsborough County, Tampa Bay in Florida. It was both Hillary and Biden, both +7. Right now, it's only Kamala +1.
And Hillary Clinton actually did some campaigning there for this particular election as well. Mark and Cornell, thank you. We'll be back early and often as we go along here.
And we will take a break here. I think we're going to come back with more on the poll closings. Here's an NBC News projection. State of Florida. NBC News projects that Donald Trump will win Florida and take its 30 electoral votes.
Senator's desk. And Senator, I wonder what you thought about that. What some are seeing is something of an alarm bell. This Loudoun County, suburban Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, where it seems that Kamala Harris is underperforming. And as you well know, the suburbs in the battleground states are key to her victory.
Yeah, listen, this is the witching hour. You know, this is when it is very early. We have exit polls. And by the way, if exit polls were correct, I would be governor and John Kerry would have been president and Hillary Clinton would have been president. So I think we've got to take all of that with a big, giant grain of salt and wait for the actual numbers to come in. Because as we all know, these come in from different places. Typically, rural places come in before urban locations. So I think she's going to be fine in the suburbs. I think, and I don't think the exit polls will actually reflect accurately what will happen with independent voters. I'm not saying she's going to dominate independent voters, but I'll be very surprised if there aren't a whole lot of women that call themselves independents that don't vote for Donald Trump.
At what point in all this do you begin to let out a sigh of relief here?
Well, listen, I think depending on what happens in Georgia and North Carolina, if by any chance she wins those two states, then I can breathe again. If she does not, then obviously Pennsylvania becomes even bigger. And let's don't sleep on Nevada. I think that may be the closest margin in this race. I think it may be literally maybe 500 to 2,000 votes separating the two candidates. I think it's that close in Nevada.
Tonight, but we'll have to wait and see. We're ready for anything. We could be surprised by anything. I want to talk about Virginia for a little bit, and a caveat here. As Chuck Todd reminded us, Northern Virginia, the suburbs, they do sort of report late. That vote is still coming in, but we still see some troubling signs for Kamala Harris, at least in some of these counties. So Biden was at 61%. 95% of the vote is in, and I just want to highlight this. There's only about 2,800 votes remaining, so not a lot of votes going to come in. She's at 56%, 57%. 61% was where Biden was. As we keep going around, my team flagged another county. Fairfax County, she's doing fine. Prince William, though, underperforming here as well. 80% of the vote is in. Biden was at 62. She's at 58. Again, these are suburban women, highly educated, college degrees, sort of your establishment Democrats.
But, you know, I come from a state that is very Trump heavy. So I certainly know that there are women out there that have bought what he's selling. I like to say I think there's about a third of the Trump voters that don't believe a word he says, but they really like the idea that their tax cut's going to stay in place, and they think their business interests are going to be better protected with less regulation. And then 2/3 of the Trump voters who believe every word he says and like it just fine.
Sure. Is that Chuck Todd's head exploding? Yes, perhaps it is. But you know, it's interesting to see these are such contested races, and it's actually nice to see. I think we've divided our country so much into red and blue.
In just 3 seconds, all of these states will see their polls closed, and we'll begin counting the votes. Here is state of Texas. We were just talking about Donald Trump will win in the state of Texas when all the votes are counted. Here's the map. The road to 270 now getting interesting. 154 for Donald Trump, 30 for Kamala Harris.
Still await results there, but let's go to Michigan. That's the biggie at this hour. Polls closing in Michigan, and it is, wait for it, too early to call. We will be waiting for it perhaps into the wee hours tonight. Let's go to Wisconsin, the other of the blue wall states, along with Michigan and Pennsylvania, too early to call. And speaking of Pennsylvania, too early to call, starting to see more vote come in, but we could be waiting a bit for that. And same with North Carolina. They're counting more quickly, but it's still too early for us to make a projection. And in Georgia, it's not too early. It's just too close. We are starting to see the vote come in. We've got 66% counted right now. And yet,
this is the madness, right? The difference right now, 220,000 votes. Trump on top with 66% of the vote in. But Republicans, it can't even get close to celebrating just yet. These sort of UFO objects we have circling Georgia right now, this is the remaining vote. And the bigger that bubble, that means the more vote that is out. And the more vote that is out right now is in the Atlanta metro region. Remember, I told you guys earlier that about 50% of the vote is going to come from this area right here. The election is essentially won or lost in the Atlanta metro region because the margins are so close. Every vote matters, but because the margins are so close, Trump runs up that rural vote. The Democrats run up the urban vote. They run up the suburban counties around Atlanta as well. Let's take a look. It's a county that is majority minority, right? Mostly black and Hispanic, and they're still winning a lot of the vote there. That could be a very good sign for Democrats tonight.
Because of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, in 2020, 51% of people felt that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. You know what it is now? 66%. That is a significant jump.
Let me just, Symone, what is worrying the Harris camp right now, looking at it from the other end of the glass?
Well, the lines are very long, and they want people to stay in line, Lester. I'm told that actually in Pennsylvania specifically, celebrities are FaceTiming in to the people who are in line, encouraging them to stay in line. So the organizers are out there with the phones saying, hey, so-and-so is on the line. There are concerts actually happening. They are looking at Pennsylvania very closely. And as the time that the vice president spent in the state, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I think is also indicative of where they see some gaps. Also, obviously, DeKalb County, in Georgia, the lines, the polling locations were staying open longer because of the bomb threats that were happening there and the evacuations that had to happen, encouraging people to know that it is safe to vote, stay in line, make your voice count. I think they want to ensure, they feel like that they can eke it out if people turn out to vote and stay in line.
All right.
They're pointing to our exit poll, which shows Donald Trump more than doubling his support among African Americans in Wisconsin. I cannot emphasize enough how much this has been an emphasis for the Trump campaign to try to improve their margins.
And how's the feeling there? What's the vibe?
Well, there's still a celebratory feel here right now. They're waiting for any particular data points that they can know if it's a good indication or not. The Harris campaign individuals still watching behind closed doors. The vice president watching alongside family and friends tonight. A lot of the donors and other big supporters of the vice president's at a hotel here in Washington, D.C. watching as well before they arrive here a little bit later this evening. I'll tell you some of the data points that they are pointing to right now as potentially some good indicators. One comes out of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. They think that's a good indication. It's a message that they're sharing right now, FaceTiming in Jennifer Garner and Demi Moore, among others, to keep those folks in line.
All right, Peter.
Symone was making that point a moment ago about it. They can keep them in line.
You can keep them in line if Jennifer Garner's on the other line talking to your mom or Paul Rudd, and that's the strategy there. We've got a race to call here.
But it just changed. That's how fast voting data is coming in. Again, you know, I love. So her easiest path is Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. She holds that blue wall. If she can do that, she gets to 270. If she's having a very rough night and she loses Pennsylvania, loses Michigan, loses Wisconsin, she has other paths, but she does have a Sun Belt path where if she can flip North Carolina, hold Georgia, hold Arizona, and get Nevada, hold it once again, she gets there as well. That path, though, would give Democrats heart palpitations. As far as former President Trump, his easiest route, just think of the east side. He holds Pennsylvania. He flips Pennsylvania. He holds North Carolina. He flips Georgia back. He gets to 270. But if he can't win Pennsylvania, he has to win somewhere else in the blue wall. He has to break through the blue wall. That's the main difference between his path and the vice president's path.
One more point just to mention as we watch all of these returns come in. When President Biden was at the top of the ticket, a state like North Carolina was out of reach for Democrats. The fact that we're talking about it right now, the fact that there's been so much play in North Carolina, that former President Trump spent so much time there in recent days, underscores the fact that they have tried to open up more paths, and we'll have to see if that was effective at all.
I want to ask a little bit about...
Stop me if you've heard it before. It may all come down to Pennsylvania, and it is too early to call, but we're about 30% of the vote there. North Carolina, also too early to call at this hour, and staying down south in the Sun Belt state of Georgia, which President Biden carried 4 years ago, and former President Trump badly wants to get back into that red column. That is too close to call at this.
Look at this electorate. From our exit polls that we're seeing now, and again, this could shift a little bit. These numbers could still change a bit as more waves of information come in. But look at what's number one. 34% of voters say the state of democracy is the most important issue to them. Put a little asterisk next to that. We're going to Biden administration.
The problem that she had was when asked specifically, I believe on an ABC program, what would you do differently? She said nothing comes to mind. And boy, the Trump
Keeping
campaign.
in mind her campaign's been, what, 108? You know.
Well, right, but that's about, you know, that question's coming when you have an unpopular incumbent. We want to go
percent in. This is actually a big flip. Let me see what this looked like in 2016. So this is interesting. Clinton won in 16, Biden won in 2020 with 92% of the vote in Trump is on top right now. Again, not a large county you're going to see. There's only about 10,000 votes here, but we're kind of reading the tea leaves and seeing where everything's at so far.
So projection here we can put up on the screen here and walk you through it. I see it as you see it. NBC News projects Donald Trump will take the state of Ohio with 17 electoral votes. There is the breakdown of 441,000 vote difference now. 64% of the vote in Ohio, and again, Donald Trump is the winner there. And there's where it takes us on the road to 270. Donald Trump out in front with 185 electoral votes. Harris with 81.
All right, let's go ahead.
Check in on the blue wall here, and we have a new characterization in the state of Wisconsin. Our decision desk now calling it too close to call. You can see Kamala Harris out front right now. 23% of the vote in there, but again, too close to call in Wisconsin. Our election. All right, as we come out of the commercial break, a new characterization here in Pennsylvania. Our decision desk now calling this race too close to call. Kamala Harris leading right now with 34% in, but again, too close to call. We also have a new characterization on the state of Michigan with its 15 electoral votes. That will also go down in the too close to call column. These aren't surprises. These are states that we thought would keep us up late, and they will.
They will. They'll live up to their billing. We're also watching. We could be up all night and perhaps beyond. Michigan didn't get called till late the next day in 2020. Pennsylvania, need I remind you, we were here till Saturday waiting for its results, but officials think they will be able to move a little bit more quickly, but at this hour, it's much too close to call. A tight race there, difference of 48,000 votes, so we will see how that shakes up. About 9 triggered here. Okay, yeah. Pennsylvania, too close to call. Got to say that was a Saturday call as well in 2020. Michigan, too close to call there. Let's see how much vote we've gotten, though, at this hour. Just 16%, so there's a lot of vote to be counted there. We'll move over to the state just nearby, Wisconsin, the other industrial Midwest battleground, 35% in. They are making some progress, but too close to call. Georgia, too close to call, but we are getting to a much higher number. We can get down into the counties in just a bit with Tom Yamas. Really, I mean, Pennsylvania, we cannot talk about it enough. It may all hinge on Pennsylvania just as it did in 2020.
Yeah, and earlier I was talking about Eastern PA. Guys, now I have to talk about Western PA. Go Steelers fans. Let's start in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County here. 66% of the vote, and let's compare it to 2020. Slightly overperforming. That's good news for Harris because that's what she needs to do there. It's tough to draw any kind of information on who's on top or who's lower right now. Still too close to call. Trump's on top, but only about 17,000 votes. You remember the spread in 2020 was about 80,000 votes. So a lot of votes still out here. One thing I do want to mention, there was an exit poll out of Pennsylvania on Latino voters, and they broke for Trump in a major way. That could possibly be a deciding effect here in Pennsylvania because you're talking about 600,000 Latinos that are registered to vote. Guys, back to you.
Can we talk a minute about the amount of money that is spent in some of these races? Pennsylvania, I'm just looking here, Pennsylvania, Biden, Harris, plus the DNC, $131.7 million.
Yeah, $314 million, I think, overall when you add both campaigns together.
$1 billion if you throw in the Senate race.
That's right. That's right.
No, on one state. Yeah. I remember making a big deal like 12 years ago. We had $1 billion presidential campaign. Yeah. One state.
Isn't that so funny? Because it started out as a tie, and now tonight we're ending up, and it's a tie right now. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we're going to be living and breathing Pennsylvania.
That's interesting, though, what Tom just mentioned about the exit poll. And again, do your caveats, but for Trump to win the Hispanic vote in Pennsylvania would be pretty huge because there's a big Hispanic population in Pennsylvania, especially in that Lehigh Valley.
That's right. There's a big Puerto Rican population in Pennsylvania too, the most of any battleground. So let's talk about where that is. And I want to start. And you can see it here. He's 45% this year. 2020, I mean, this is a double-digit plus overperformance from where he was just 4 years ago. And if you get into
county, when I was Obama's campaign manager, I was obsessed with Bucks County. And so far, it's looking like very early numbers, but she's doing really, really well. We've talked about the Latino vote. That is a very scary number for the Harris campaign, and they're going to want to do better. But the thing about those are three things that I'm seeing very early that make her campaign pretty happy. But in general, Trump is running up numbers in rural better than he did in 2020, which has to concern the Harris campaign. And we feel really good about their ground operation. They have the best ground operation person in American politics, and Jen O'Malley Dillon is the chair, who has built a $1 billion field campaign for this moment. And they're really going for it on the college campuses, and they kind of need it right now.
Jim.
Savannah, I've been talking to Trump campaign officials, and look, we all know the cliche on election days where you hear campaign sources say they're feeling cautiously optimistic. What has happened in the last half hour is my sources have stopped using the word cautious to describe their optimism. They are feeling increasingly confident as more and more votes come in, despite the fact that no battlegrounds have been called, that their theory of the case is being proven correct. And what I mean by that is the Trump campaign set out at the beginning of this race to expand the Republican Party. They knew they couldn't win with their old coalition. They had to get more younger voters, more black voters, more Latino voters, even by small amounts to join their coalition. In the battleground states, they are seeing that happen. And if it does happen, it would be a historic realignment of the parties. Now, again, none of these battlegrounds have been called, but with all the battleground states now closed, the voting is done, except for the folks who are waiting in line. They feel like there's not much else left for them to do but watch and wait in an increasingly optimistic atmosphere, both here at West Palm Beach and at Mar-a-Lago, where Trump and his closest allies, friends, and family are watching the results come in.
Well, I think there's certainly a level of anxiety, at least according to some of the Harris allies with whom I've been speaking to over the course of the last hour or so. One ally telling me that, just look at the state of North Carolina, Josh Stein, the Democrat, winning his effort to become the state's governor. That we were able to project a while back, but obviously not the same for Kamala Harris, at least not yet. That indicates that there's clearly some split ticket voters there. Some folks who will be voting for Josh Stein as governor, but then Donald Trump as president. Otherwise, we would have a projection already in that state right now. They say that is an indicator that gives some anxiety right now going forward that North Carolina may not be a state that they're able to win. If that happens, and these are all ifs, it's all very early here, that does again shrink their path to victory to 270. They really are relying heavily on those blue wall states right now. And one of those key states obviously is Pennsylvania, the biggest prize of them all with 19 electoral votes. I spent
huge question mark. If you woke up on Sunday and you watched Meet the Press with Kristen Welker, it was a huge headline, right? Yes. People woke up on Sunday, and according to the Des Moines Register poll, Harris was up by 3 points within the margin of error.
Actually, I have a call right now. Let's play the music here. Projection, and Iowa will go red, as was widely expected until that poll. Right there, Trump wins the 6 electoral votes of Iowa, and so we can see the breakdown there with about half the vote counted there. So there was this thought that perhaps because of his restrictive abortion ban that just went into effect in July, and this highly respected pollster coming out, that perhaps there was going to be a wave of independent women who could somehow turn this red state blue, but this was not to be, Chuck.
No, I mean, look, this is a miss because this looks exactly the way Iowa looked 4 years ago. We're in margin of error range there. So, look, she thought she had found something
this
with
is the pollster that we're talking about, yeah.
Independent women looking like they were choosing, and certainly we've seen some evidence of it in national polls, a point or two here or there. And look, I've seen it throughout the Midwest, but it's a point here or a point there. I don't know if it's enough to make up for the loss of voters of color that have cleared.
This is one of the big battleground states, could be the biggest. 19 electoral votes, too close to call, the characterization.
Biden flipped it in 2020. Right now, 47% of the votes in. We want to dive a little deeper and look at some of these counties. We're going to start with the biggest one, Milwaukee. Again, we're still waiting for a lot of the vote in Milwaukee. We're expecting this a little later in the night. 51% is in. Let's see how Harris is doing compared to Biden 4 years ago. She's down about 3 points, 3 or 4 points, 2 points, actually, we should say. But we're still waiting on the vote there. Let's go over to Madison. This is Dane County. This is where the University of Wisconsin is. This is one of the fastest growing areas of the state here. 75% for Biden in 2020. She's 2 points down, but again, 75% of the vote is still out. It's the Bow counties and the Wow. Bow Wow. I know that's pretty funny, but maybe it's not that funny. Anyways, Brown is Green Bay.
It'll pass.
It'll pass. Trump is 52%. He's up big time here, but again, only 33% of the vote is in, and there are a lot of Democratic votes in Green Bay as well. We're going to come down here to the O and Bow Outagamie, 54-57. Again, he's overperforming there, and then finally in Winnebago, 36%. I want to show 2 more counties you guys may have heard of, you may not have. Racine, these are suburbs of Milwaukee, getting closer to Chicago. These were counties that Trump flipped from Obama, and then he held them 4 years later. 15% in. Trump was at 51-68. That's a strong number for him. We go to Kenosha, which has been in the headlines, especially after the George Floyd protests. 50% in 2020, 73% in. He's overperforming there. So if you're looking at Wisconsin right now, I mean, the Republicans have some sort of positivity here that they're looking at. Sauk County is one of these counties that we watch.
How's the blue wall looking right now, Senator?
Well, you know what? I just got to say, with the exception of brave Ann Selzer and her poll in Iowa, where clearly she did not get it right, it looks like the pollsters got it right in this election because I'm looking at these blue walls. If you look at Berks County, Harris is underperforming. You look at Lancaster County, she's overperforming. It's going to be razor close. I don't think there's any question. Now, what we're going to have to figure out is, do we have a country where an election can be close and people can accept the results? That's the question that I'm beginning to worry about, that if these are all really close and they go the way of Donald Trump, I don't think there'll be any problem.
Well, Mark, we live in a 50-50 world. I mean, we do. I mean,
we really do.
And it's not going to stop after, you know, Wednesday or beyond.
No, and one of the things I'll tell you I'm looking at right now is Philadelphia itself, because while Kamala Harris has her margin, the numbers aren't there. She's about 2 points behind right now of where Joe Biden was, but there was a 471,000 vote difference to offset the rural areas. Right now, with 50% of the vote in, the last time I looked, she's on pace for maybe 390,000, maybe 400 or so thousand. That's if the current margins hold, and that's a projection. She needs to be above 450. Yeah. And if we're down there in that right, because right now it's about 190,000 vote difference with 50% in.
It's early, but I mean, it seems like what we're gleaning from exit polls and other data is that the Trump campaign is overperforming, doing very well with Hispanic voters and young men. That Joe Rogan army appears to be real in a lot of these places. Is that what you're seeing, Mark?
No, absolutely. I think they're very excited by that, and they also see that they're overperforming in rural areas. I think they're trying to cut their losses in the urban areas and in some of the suburbs.
Claire, what are you hearing from the Democratic side?
Well, first of all, I think that there's a lot of people on the Democratic side that are paying a lot of attention to what's happening with Sherrod Brown and Jon Tester right now.
How about that? Yeah.
Because the fact that it's been called for Trump in Montana and it hasn't been called for the Senate race gives you an indication. Same thing in Ohio. And I think everybody needs to remember what Lester just said is true. It's a 50-50 country. Let's assume for purposes of this conversation that, in fact, they take the Senate. And let's assume for purposes that Trump wins the presidency. They're not going to have more than 51 votes in the Senate, maybe 52. And you have a couple of Republicans that are not all on board with some of the Trump stuff, like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. You could actually have a situation where the Senate is frozen in either administration. Depending on how it goes. So now's a time that I think that, regardless of how this turns out, I think the leader of this country needs to realize it's time to quit dividing and try to unite and figure out if we can't find ways to work together.
The vice president did something very specific. She looked to once she got into the race not too long ago, she looked to cast Donald Trump as a danger to democracy, but she also looked to make the positive case for herself and why she should get another 4 years. Her campaign spent so much time in places like Wisconsin. Think about that Ripon visit, the birthplace of the Republican Party, bringing out Liz Cheney, former congresswoman on the Republican side. I think everybody knows who the Cheney family is, trying to reach out to this tiny slice of people who aren't quite totally in their tribal corners. Former President Trump looked to supercharge his base.
But
Savannah.
it's so interesting because you say it's a tiny number, and it is, but these were Haley voters, a lot of them. I mean, Kamala Harris went around with Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
They went to these
Adam
color counties.
all these,
yes. And in Arizona, we saw, Jimmy McCain and some of these big names, former Republicans, Jeff Flake, who are out there. She was trying to find those moms, those suburban women who just had enough with Donald Trump. 7:35 in the West, and we've got all battlegrounds closed right now and votes being counted. And too close to call is something you're going to hear me say a lot over these next few moments. That's the story in Pennsylvania, about 58% of the vote in there. In Michigan, also too close to call, the battleground state where both candidates spent a ton of time, alongside Wisconsin as well. Too close to call at this hour, still counting about half the vote in there. Let's go down south. The Sun Sun Belt path. Georgia, too close to call. Biden won it by a hair in 2020. Donald Trump trying to get it back tonight, too close to call. In North Carolina, we're still calling it too early to call, so we're waiting for more vote there, even though 84% of the vote is in. In Arizona, too early to call, too. We just had the polls closed there about 90 minutes ago. They got to wait a little bit before they can even start counting votes there. And same thing in Nevada.
Center County, it's in the center of the state. This is red right now. 68% of the vote is in. Biden won this in 2020. Hillary Clinton won this in 2016. Why am I highlighting this county? Let me move the map over again. Center County. This is Penn State. This is Happy Valley. This is a university county. The Democrats should be on top right now. Again, there's 68% of the vote in. They could still catch up, but Trump is on top right now. I want to go back to Hampton. This is one of those bellwethers, Savannah, you were talking about. It almost always picks the winner going back to like the Kennedy years, I think. Trump won it in 2016. Biden won it in 2020. Right now, Trump's on top. 73% of the vote is in, so there's still vote out. Those things could change. Again, it's still early. We're not calling these counties as well. I want to zoom in here. 92% of the vote is in. Trump is up at 56. It's not a huge surprise, but what it shows is that he's overperforming. He won this county in 2016 and 2020, and tonight he's overperforming. Again, some of that vote is still out, but we're watching that. Finally, I want to look at Scranton right here, okay? Lackawanna County. Republicans thought they maybe had a chance in Scranton at least to peel away some of the votes there. Again, this is where Joe Biden was from. People wondered if he got the friends and family discount there with voters. She's underperforming tonight, 51% right now. Biden was at 53. In a state where it could be determined by 40,000 votes, 80,000 votes, every little bit matters. If they're looking at the map right now and you're a Republican, you're probably feeling a little bit better. But again, I just want to say it's still so early in the night, and there's still a lot of vote out. Philadelphia County, just because this was brought up on the set earlier, 62% of the vote is in. Biden was at 81. She's at 77. A lot of the vote is still out. But again, she wants to be in the same high watermarks where Biden is, guys.
Yeah, Mark, you think there's not enough vote for her to make up that margin?
Well, there's still a lot out there. I'm just saying all of these things start to add up. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. And so
it is independents. Doesn't mean he's winning them, but he's doing better than he was 4 years ago. Here's where her improvement is, and this is interesting. It's with seniors. It's with voters over the age of 65, and we're starting to see that trend for her.
You pointed to me when you said seniors.
No, oh my gosh, Savannah.
And I just want to let everyone know that we noticed.
It deflected off your shoulder.
Full disclosure, we talked about it in the commercial break like 2 hours ago, so it was more of a callback to something that I forgot we didn't say on the air because we're chit-chatting constantly. But the seniors piece of it is interesting because think about who actually gets out and votes, right? Who is more likely to get out there and vote? It is seniors. So there's some fascinating dynamics at play, and as we're all talking about, 10:40, we're only on our first cup of coffee.
I think one of the dynamics at play as we watch these results come in that's so fascinating. You think about how close, what a tough slog Pennsylvania is as we watch this come in, and you think about that decision that she made to have Walz as her running mate, as opposed to Governor Josh Shapiro. So as we watch this come in, and even on the day that she made that announcement, a lot of people questioned, what would Pennsylvania look like with Shapiro on the ticket? And
Governor
you have
Shapiro,
to think folks are thinking
well,
about
I mean,
that.
if she loses Pennsylvania, you can guarantee that story is already being written. I mean, Senator McCaskill, Josh Shapiro has, even in pretty red counties, is a very popular governor.
He is, but so is Tim Walz in the Midwest. And I think what her decision was, you know, one of judgment, where she looked at somebody who had a resume just like hers, and she looked at someone who was much different. He wasn't Ivy League. He wasn't all smooth. He was relatable and a coach and somebody who really kind of oozed Midwestern relatability. And I think that's, she thought, was an add plus as opposed to just a mirror of who she was. And, you know, I don't know if it was the right call or not. I think they're both terrific people. Either way, they're going to be around. Shapiro's not going anywhere. You may see him on a ballot in the future.
Yeah, I'm just going to call it out. You sound like you see the end here.
I don't. I do think that, you know, obviously we're disappointed about North Carolina and Georgia because there was a real feeling that there was such a good ground game compared to what the Trump
And to be
team
clear,
was
we
doing.
haven't called those.
No, we haven't. But I'm looking internally at the numbers, and they're not as hopeful as I would like them to be. I still think we have a path, obviously, in the blue wall states, and I don't think anybody knows how Nevada is going to turn out. And I think that is another one. We could have 4 states that determine the presidency that are all decided by less than ½ point.
Okay. Thanks for that.
That's so 2024, Senator.
How's that?
Right now, we want to go to Peter Alexander at Harris headquarters to really gauge the temperature in the room. Peter?
Well, we're outside, and it's a loud one here, but I can tell you, if you get into the crowd here, it's particularly quiet in terms of their sense of optimism right now. That's how one Harris ally just described it to me a short time ago. I ran into a longtime Democratic source, a person who was close to the Harris campaign, and I asked them what they make of the results they've seen so far. They said, honestly, this is not looking so good for us, but then they quickly put on a smile and said, but you know what? We just got to keep smiling for the night. That may give you a better understanding of where they feel like things may be going right now. It remains early, a lot of votes still to count, but I'll tell you what I just heard from a Democratic lawmaker right now who just wrote me in part, quote, "It's pretty concerning. I just keep reminding myself that 8 years ago, all the trends in the first few hours showed Hillary winning, and then she didn't. But obviously, this is not the return we were looking for." It gives you a little sense of the way that some of those people supporting Kamala Harris are feeling this evening right now. Again, a lot of numbers, a lot of data still to be counted right now. But as Claire McCaskill said a short time ago, some of the early results we're seeing in some of those places, North Carolina, Georgia, are not looking as positive as the Harris campaign had been hoping. It doesn't mean that they still don't have a path, but it does certainly increasingly mean that they'd have to succeed in holding on to that blue wall. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And frankly, speaking to some people in some of those states that are involved with the Harris campaign, they said that's where they are seeing some concern that that's going to be a tightrope that they have to still try to walk tonight. Lester?
Now let's go to our battlegrounds. Pennsylvania, too close to call, 11 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock in the West. Same story in Michigan, too close to call at this hour, with about a third of the vote counted there. In Wisconsin, it is too close to call. You knew it would be a tight election. The polls all showed it, and that's certainly being borne out tonight. 60% of the vote in there. In Georgia, it is too close to call. Getting closer to that final number there, but we're still, the margins are just too close to make a call in that presidential race. Same thing in North Carolina. In fact, it's too early to call. We are still awaiting vote there. What are you making of what we're seeing, what the trend lines are?
There's a reason why there's anxiety in the Harris camp and growing enthusiasm and optimism. I mean, all the trend lines, this looks a lot more like 2016 to me than it does 2020. And you're seeing whether it's rural turnout surging up, but we've had to up our projection of total turnout in Georgia than what we saw. And as we'd been saying, and we'd seen this, higher turnout was always going to be better for Trump. Not, you know, there's always been this. Can we also remember one other thing here? Because this is, she was trying to do something as a sitting vice president that had never been done before. Succeed an unpopular president. Okay? Hubert Humphrey tried to do this, and he came 1 percentage point short. It was a very close election. The electoral vote wasn't close, but it was a very close election. But it came up short. Al Gore tried to do this. While Bill Clinton's presidency was popular, Bill Clinton, the individual, was not. We all know he came up 537 votes short, as Lester will tell you over and over again. So the last sitting vice president to win was George H.W. Bush, with an outgoing president that had a 60-plus approval rating. He was at 41%. I mean, that is, you are asking somebody to overperform in a way that we may find out was politically impossible.
This sounds a little bit like a postmortem, so I want to make sure we
No, and I don't think we're there.
We have not called.
And let me give you the view from the Harris campaign.
And by the way, they know if they win, it's going to be like this. Like, their path is razor thin.
That's exactly what they're saying. There's this new memo that is out now from the chair of the Harris campaign that was sent to staffers, obtained by our Monica Alba and our team that covers the Harris camp. And this is exactly the point, right? Which is why I wanted to jump in here on this. She says, they say that the closeness of this race is what we prepared for all along. They still see data trickling in from Sunbelt, but all along they knew it was going to be blue wall. I mean, listen, to a degree, of course, this is what they're going to say, but they say they think they're still feeling good about Pennsylvania, overperforming turnout in Philadelphia in some of these areas. In Michigan, they say there's still a lot of vote to come in. In Wisconsin, there's still a lot of vote remaining. General O'Malley Dillon says in this memo, we've been saying for weeks this race may not be called tonight.
Going to interrupt here because we do have an NBC.
Of Wisconsin, Dane County. This is also the site of the University of Wisconsin as well. 92% of the vote in. Harris doing a little better than when we last checked in with her, but again, she's slightly underperforming Biden. She still has time to catch up. There's still 8% of the vote that's out. We actually know exactly how much of the vote is out. About 30,000 votes remain there. So maybe maybe she picks up the margins there. We also want to talk about Milwaukee. This is the biggest population center in the entire state of Wisconsin. Right now, 54% of the vote is in, so a lot of that vote is still out. It's probably going to be a little bit later till we can call Milwaukee by itself. Biden was at 69. She's down about 2 to 3 points. Again, this would be concerning for Democrats. But look, there's still a lot of vote out in Milwaukee.
Participating in the celebration that has begun among his closest supporters, his family and friends, despite a race that remains uncalled. I'm also told, NBC News can also report, that he's in discussions with his aides and advisors about when he might make the trip across the bridge here to West Palm Beach to give some form of speech tonight. Now, we have been asking him about this day after day. Would he declare victory early? Would he rule out the possibility of declaring victory early? We all remember him doing that, exactly that, in 2020 when so much of the vote remained to be counted. He has refused to take an early declaration of victory off the table, and it's our understanding now that conversations are underway for him to make some kind of address here tonight, regardless of where we are on the path to 270 votes.
We are waiting to hear, of course, from Kamala Harris at some point over the course of this evening. No indication when that would happen. Some early indications that might happen in the course of this hour. No confirmation on that at this time. We'll keep you posted as we know. I will tell you a memo that was sent out by the chair of the Harris campaign, Jen O'Malley Dillon, the woman who orchestrated Joe Biden's victory in 2020. This was sent to staff, and it gives you a sense of where they are heading into this evening. They expect nothing will be determined until late into the night, and certainly they say they're going to be at this again tomorrow. But as she notes in this memo, again, she says that they have always said that the clearest path to 270 electoral votes lies through the blue wall states. And here's what she says specifically about Pennsylvania. She says that we overperformed turnout expectations in Philadelphia and overperformed in our early vote expectations in Bucks County, one of those key collar counties, those key suburbs of Philadelphia. She says we don't have election day results from Philadelphia, but we do know that we overperformed turnout expectations there and have seen especially high turnout in places with non-white and student populations. One thing they're keeping a close eye on right now. About Michigan particularly, they say the city of Detroit won't be reporting out until roughly midnight, but that they have seen strong turnout from early vote and election day voting in other parts of the state. And finally, in Wisconsin, where they're keeping a close eye on that blue wall, that they do not expect complete results from Wisconsin until tomorrow morning between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. But the biggest takeaway perhaps from this memo is the sense that as the chips start falling, it appears that they are leaning heavily into the blue wall, which started and may be ending as their best path to victory here. In spite of some numbers that show they still have some ground to make up, there's still a lot of data out there. And that's where, at least according to her memo, which effectively said goodbye to the staff for the night, said we'll do it again late into the night and start again strong in the morning. That's where they are as this night heads toward midnight.
All right, Peter, thank you. Now, the vibe check is that this path is narrowing significantly and that it's blue wall or bust at this point for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, that seems right. And we look at the numbers, it's very clear that Trump is overperforming in rural counties, and Harris is overperforming in suburban counties. And what is going to maybe the deciding factor here is primarily going to be what is the turnout and the vote margins coming out of Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Detroit. And if they are what we think they are, then she has a very clear, albeit narrow, but clear path to be the next president of the United States.
John, let me ask you about what we've been observing. Young voters, particularly male voters, who seem to be breaking for Trump and, in fact, winning the youth vote, according to our exit polls. Does that surprise you? What's your take on that dynamic?
That would be surprising. I think that's another reason to drink. But I do think that I think
drinking
it's
alone,
pretty
John.
Early. I think that's fine. That's fine. I think it's pretty early to be drawing conclusions based on the exits and trying to figure out what happened with specific demographics. I think where we're at is this was always going to be close. It is close right now. I think there was some hope based on vibes that perhaps this wouldn't be as close based on some late polling and some late momentum and a terrible event at Madison Square Garden. Could we hope that maybe this night wouldn't be as long? And the answer is no. The polls largely were showing a very tight race, and that's what we're kind of living through.
Dan, do you think it will ultimately come down to Pennsylvania? I mean, that certainly has been what's been telegraphed for all of these months.
It is the essential state because if Georgia and North Carolina, she does not win, and there's still a lot of outstanding vote in Georgia. It's once again a narrow path. But if those do not end up in her column, there is no math without Pennsylvania. You can replace Wisconsin with Arizona. You can replace Michigan with Arizona and Wisconsin, but you need Pennsylvania, and so it will come down to Pennsylvania.
All right, Dan Pfeiffer, John Levitt.
You know, look, I don't see any good news for Democrats in these results. Donald Trump is running about a point or a point and a half ahead of where he was in 2020. And in these counties, in these blue wall counties that 75% of the vote is in, and Kamala Harris is running behind in these urban areas by 1 or 2 points compared to where President Biden performed. You look at that coupled with Donald Trump's overperformance with Hispanic voters, with young voters. I don't think they have a lot to hang their hat on. It's not over. There's votes to be counted. We should point out that these blue wall states tend to be red mirage. You know, they go red and then they tend to go, the race narrows as these big urban areas come in later. But when you just look at the underperformance of Kamala Harris and the overperformance of Trump, it's going to be pretty hard, I think, for her to catch him.
Yeah, the Harris team is saying they believe they overperformed in Philadelphia. Does that give you pause?
I don't see where they're saying that. Now, they're looking, I'm sure, at precinct analysis, and we're looking at a county total, so we should give that caveat. But, you know, Joe Biden got 80% of the vote in Philadelphia County, and she's not running at 80%. I think she's, the last I looked, was at 77 or 78%. So that's a pretty significant difference when a race is as close as it is.
All right, Sarah and Mike,
Yeah, Georgia, but I also want to give us just sort of a vibe check of where we are. It is still very early in the night, right? And even though people may be claiming they've won certain states yet, we still haven't called any of the battlegrounds here at NBC News. And a reminder, Harris's easiest path is to hold the blue wall. If she wins Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, remember, she gets to the White House. Even if she loses Georgia, North Carolina, the entire Sun Belt, she still gets there. Let's talk about Georgia, though. Let's find out where we are there in the Peach State. Still too close to call for NBC News right now. 91% of the vote is in, but let's talk about where the vote remains. Look at, okay, the giant circles, remember those giant bubbles? That's the vote that still is outstanding. We're still waiting on this vote to be counted. And we know the exact number, or we can estimate the exact number. We think it's going to be about 487,000 votes. There's still almost 500,000 votes out in Georgia, still up for grabs here.
For him. And you're seeing some pretty astounding numbers.
Well, you are. You know, it's interesting. Well, first of all, look, Georgia is going to shrink. You got about all of this vote is going to be Democratic vote. She's got to win the remaining probably 2-1. That's like a reasonable thing. I mean, Georgia's probably going to be decided by 4 or 5 digits.
And where the vote is outstanding,
exactly.
You think there's a shot?
Yeah, I think we will be. I think we might be sticking around Georgia for a little while. Just it does. If you're them, you can't totally write it off. There's a path there. But our pollsters did some quick noted some comparisons to 2020. Just simply Trump margins. These are not in the battleground states, but it gives you a hint of the possibility Donald Trump could actually win the popular vote if he wins the Electoral College tonight. So, for instance, in Texas, he only won Texas by a little over 5 points in 2020. He's won it by 14 points tonight. In Iowa, it was 8 points. It's nearly 15 points tonight. In Florida, it was 3 points. It's nearly 13 points tonight for Trump. Not only gave you some blue states, Virginia, it was a 10-point Biden victory. It looks like it's going to be somewhere between 2 and 4 this time in Virginia. New Jersey, 15 points Biden. Right now, it's 5 for Harris. Illinois, another state, is little under 10. It was at 17 points for Biden. So Trump has improved his standing in a lot of blue states. We'd seen whoever wins the Electoral College is probably going to win the popular vote.
Those are pretty dramatic margins. I mean, we're not picking about a point or 2 here. You're talking with Texas
5 points,
5,
10
6,
points,
7, 8. I mean, that's
well. This is the Hispanic shift in the Southeast. It's clear. Florida and Texas. That's the massive Latino shift that we've seen tonight in those 2 states. But it may be spots of it everywhere.
So I'm getting reaction in from Democratic lawmakers, from Democratic operatives. Some are still saying, look, we could still win this thing. We can hold on to the blue wall. And that's absolutely accurate because we're still tracking the vote. But one Democratic lawmaker, sort of to the point that Chuck is making, saying if this race does not go Kamala Harris's way, this is a moment of reckoning for the Democratic Party. This person saying there needs to be a hard look at what went wrong and potentially really a real passing of the baton when it comes to leadership. And of course, the attention will turn to President Biden. And when he stepped aside, 72% in our exit polls saying the country is headed in the wrong direction. That's the backdrop to all of this. President Biden and this immense dissatisfaction with the direction that the country's headed.
It could be the Democratic Party was allowed itself to just organize itself being an anti-Trump party. And in some ways, so focused on creating an anti-Trump coalition, they stopped being a political party, right, to come up with.
Pennsylvania at this hour, 79% of the vote in, too close to call. We've talked a lot about the different counties and whether there's enough for Kamala Harris to make up where she's lost in some of the rural areas. Let's go to Michigan, too close to call there as well, but a lot more vote to be counted. In Wisconsin, let's see how much we've got there. About 2/3 of the vote or so, too close to call. In Georgia, we're getting close to a close there, but they do count their votes fast there, and it's 91% in, but we will see what happens. Too close to call. North Carolina, too early to call. We will wait and see what happens there, but again, starting to see 88% of the vote coming in there. Let's go out west. Arizona, too early to call. Polls closed about 2.5 hours ago there. What looks like we have a projected winner. This just came in right now. Okay, North Carolina, Donald Trump is the projected winner. You see the margin there, 136,000. So Donald Trump improved on his margin by back of the envelope math, 50,000 votes there in North Carolina. That's going to be a real disappointment for the Kamala Harris campaign. They had hoped that if North Carolina could be clawed back into the blue column, perhaps that would open up other paths for them out west, a Sunbelt path. It is looking like blue wall or bust. That is where it stands right now, 172 electoral votes for Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in the lead right now.
Let's go to Tom.
Remove it anymore. This number, before we called North Carolina, Harris had more paths than Trump did. But this is essentially where we started the night. This is the way it ended in 2020, right? He won North Carolina. President Biden had won the rest of the battleground states. But this gives the Republicans and former President Trump some hope. We now move to Georgia. We're going to be looking at the vote in Georgia. But as Chuck mentioned, very, very close in Georgia. And we're going to be waiting on that vote, the full vote to come out of Atlanta in those ring counties right now. But a big win for former President Trump. It's the first battleground we're calling tonight.
All right, Tom, thanks very much.
Remember, there was some late polling in the state that came just over the weekend that suggested that perhaps Kamala Harris was surging in North Carolina, that maybe she was making gains among some of these voters. That is clearly not turning out to be the case. That said, you've seen the reporting from her campaign that they are looking at the all-important blue wall. Of course, the question is, if Georgia goes, and I know you and Chuck were just talking about Georgia, but if Georgia does end up in the red column, it is Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania.
Well, to that point, the Secretary of State in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, who people are familiar with from the last election, has said on the record that Trump has an insurmountable lead in Georgia with the number of votes outstanding. So he's the Secretary of State. I think he knows what he's speaking of, but we will continue to watch.
We've got another race to call, another presidential call. This is in the state of Virginia. This call coming a little later than many people might have expected, but Kamala Harris will win the 13 electoral votes in Virginia. There's the breakdown right now, 134,000 vote difference, 80.
To you, I mean, look, it's getting to be a narrower path for Kamala Harris, no question about it. It's the blue wall or bust at this point.
It's math.
Yeah, it's math.
Ultimately, look, I think that Jen O'Malley-Dillon email that NBC News obtained that you've talked about a little bit tells you a lot about where the heads are of the people on the campaign.
This is the chair of the campaign.
The chair of the campaign. She was also the campaign manager when Biden won in 2020. And basically, they did not talk about it. I know NBC has not made a call in Georgia, but they did not mention that Georgia is not a part of that email. Neither is North Carolina. You just made a call on that. It's about the blue wall states, and she warns that Arizona and Nevada will take some time. What does become challenging, I think part of the purpose of an email like that is also to buck up the troops inside, the team who's been working so hard for months, that's part of it, and also to send that note to supporters. But yes, it becomes, as the path becomes narrower, there's no more margin for error. Or no more margin for something going a different way than you hoped it would. And right now, what the Harris team is doing, which happens on every presidential campaign, as you know as well, is sitting in what you call the boiler room, which is kind of an intense word to use, but that's what it's called. And they're looking at their vote goals in these counties and how the outcome aligns. And you look at everything from did they get what they needed in the big cities in Philly? There are some cities that haven't fully come in, so they're waiting for those. But also what the margins are for Trump, which are higher, as you've been reporting, and we've been talking about over on MSNBC, in some of the rural counties, meaning he's getting more votes there that they need to make up for in the cities. So certainly that the Harris team would love to have been in their win column earlier. But again, I think for them, what becomes harder and harder is as you get more vote total in and the path becomes narrower and narrower and narrower. And that's a bit where they are at this moment.
The sitting governor, Tim Walz, on the ticket. Minnesota's governor, Tim Walz.
And a pretty popular governor in Minnesota. And there's a lot of things that bend the mind a little bit if you're the Harris team, including that. I don't know that they're overly worried about Minnesota, but certainly, yes, would have liked to have that and Virginia in their win column earlier.
I've heard a lot.
Yeah, we have heard some notable remarks from the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, concerning the race here in Georgia. Now, before I say them, I want to make it clear, NBC News is still characterizing Georgia as too close to call. But I want to let you know what Raffensperger said not too long ago in a news conference. He said that he believes, looking at the numbers, Donald J. Trump has a, quote, insurmountable lead with the number of votes outstanding. He later goes on to say, it looks like this is pretty much done, and then says, quote, I think the results are pretty well baked in based on where the leads are right now. He's talking about the state of Georgia. Now, again, NBC News still characterizing this as too close to call, but we're talking with Brad Raffensperger. Of course, he is in the control center in his Secretary of State's office, watching those results come in, watching the numbers, and also where those votes are coming in as well. Now, I've spent the evening talking to some of my Republican sources throughout the state, and I asked them the question. I said, you know, one, how are they feeling? They were all optimistic. But
been able to expand. So I'm going to click on a county here like Cobb County. I'm going to bring it out to compare to Joe Biden in 2020. Remember, she wants to perform over or at where Biden is right now to kind of see where her watermarks are. I'm going to highlight this so you guys can see the numbers to follow. Remember, on the left-hand side, she wants to be at where he is or higher. So let's see where we're at here. Fulton County, 71-72, slightly under. We move over to Gwinnett, a little bit under, you know. 73, she's overperforming in Rockdale County. We come to DeKalb here, a little bit under. We come over to Douglas County. She's overperforming. But here's the flip side of all this. Let's throw a dart to the east side of Georgia. Any county, I'm going to pick a random county. Look how Trump's overperforming, 68% to 71. Again, I'm going to just touch random counties here, 65, 69. These aren't big counties, but any county I touch, he's going, well, except for that one, any other county. Well, actually, no, he flipped it. Actually, this any county you come here in rural Georgia, he's flipping all these counties. And like Psaki just said, it's math. Can they run up the score here? Is this what the Secretary of State is talking about, that the numbers are so high in the rural counties, Democrats won't catch them in the Atlanta metro region, but there's still a lot of vote out in this area. So that's one of the reasons why we can't call Georgia just yet. Let me go.
Pennsylvania, the biggest prize, 84% of the vote in. It is too close to call. In Wisconsin, same story. Here we go. 75% of the vote in, a difference of 87,000 votes. Michigan, Georgia, too close to call at this hour, too. We just discussed that. So that might be a ray of light for Kamala Harris, or perhaps a very a narrowing of her path to victory. We should mention, Tom, we have called North Carolina. That was the first battleground to call, and it stays in the red column for Donald Trump.
Republicans can't really draw too much out of this, but Democrats would rather these counties were all blue. Let's move a little further south around the collar counties of Philadelphia here. Montgomery County, this is where Governor Shapiro is from, 61%. Performing slightly under Joe Biden, but not too bad. Chester County, 58 to 54. That's a bigger gap there. Again, remember, Joe Biden wins Pennsylvania because he does better than Hillary Clinton in those suburbs around Philadelphia. And let's take a look at Philadelphia right now. Okay, 81 for Biden, 77 for Kamala Harris. There's still about 30% of the vote is out. But again, these aren't the trend lines that Democrats are going to want to see. Look, it could all change when that vote comes in. This is where we are right now. This is a snapshot in time. It could all change. Erie County,
because as you well know, fun fact alert, Door County has, do you like the fun fact alert? It picks the president the last 6 elections.
Yeah, so right now, if that's what you're betting on, Door County is blue. Democrats are on top there. But look, guys, this is a very small number. Door County is not a big county. county, but it's one that all the political watchers look at because it usually picks the winner almost always of the statewide race in Wisconsin. Right now it's blue. That's a great sign for Democrats. I'm going to look at another one, like I mentioned, Sauk County. This is another one that usually picks the winner. Trump is on top here. Biden won it in 2020, so he's really overperforming, going from 48 to 52. But again, there's still about 30% of the vote that's out there.
So apart over at Kamala Harris headquarters in Washington, D.C. So what is the mood there?
Well, you can hear the music blaring, but within the crowd right now, it's pretty silent. A lot of glum looks on the faces here over the course of this evening. They've been playing as the returns were coming in on one of the cable channels, and frankly, they weren't the returns that most of the people here in the room wanted. So you start hearing several dozen people start chanting, "Music, music." They muted the TV and blasted some music so they could sort of lift the spirits of some of the folks here this evening. I'll tell you, based on an attendee who was at one of the Harris events taking place at a hotel not far from here, the situation there, the scene was described as that of a funeral right now. Now, that doesn't mean this thing is over, but it does give you a sense of the way people are feeling right now. I was with Kamala Harris just yesterday as she was traveling through Pennsylvania at that late night event. Actually, it was just 24 hours ago that she was with Lady Gaga, Ricky Martin, Oprah Winfrey, and she said to the tens of thousands gathered that momentum is on our side, but clearly there was a different message being communicated now in the form of that document that was obtained by NBC News, the statement sent by the campaign chair, Jen O'Malley Dillon, saying basically that we always knew this race was going to be tight, and increasingly it appears that they believe the blue wall states are their best path going forward at this time. That's what it seems to be the way this night is going to go for most folks here. It's not the end of the road. Jen O'Malley Dillon also saying we're going to keep at it tomorrow, but we wait to hear from Kamala Harris, of course, in the course of the next couple of hours. We'll let you know.
Jen, how a moment like this, now we know earlier in the evening they were trying to keep them in line and all this, but now you're at a point where you have no control.
You don't, but you need to keep the campaign team's spirits up, because they're continuing to talk to voters and counsel people who may have questions, and they're still a part of this big team that's been working to elect Kamala Harris. They don't have control, but the end has not happened yet, and so they need to keep them all, their spirits up. That's the goal.
You say the end hasn't happened yet. I mean, do you still hold out hope that there's a path? I mean, a reasonable path?
Well, look, I think it becomes, as I said earlier, more and more challenging as more results come in, and you see that the blue wall looks like the primary possible path, and as you see her underperforming Biden in a number of these counties, that makes it more challenging. Now, there are still, if you talk to Democrats, which I have, they believe there are votes that are still coming in Philadelphia. There are still votes coming in cities. That's often how these nights go. So I'm a believer you got to wait until you know. That's what happens internally here as well. But yes, if you're on the campaign right now, you're feeling pretty down because there are places you wanted to have in your win column to give you more space and breathing room, and you don't have them in this moment.
As we talk about...
Welcome back. If you have stepped away or heard parts of the conversation, know that this race is not over. This is the road to 270. That, of course, the magic number. Donald Trump right now leading with 230, Harris with 189.
Battleground states. Almost the whole game is Wayne County. It's Detroit. Not enough vote there. About a quarter of the vote is in. We can't really make any projections or calls here because so much of that vote is out. But just to give you an idea of where Biden was in 2020, again, a lot of this vote is out, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but 68% tonight, right now, Harris at this point in time is at 58%. Not a great number for her. It is a Democrats. I also want to talk about Washtenaw. This is the University of Michigan. Go Big Blue if you're a fan out there. 71% of the vote is in. Remember, this is a college county. Democrats have to do very well here. Biden, 72%. Tonight, Harris is underperforming right now with almost three quarters of the vote in. Ingham County, again, another college county. This is where Michigan State is. Half the vote is in. Biden was at 65. Harris is at 56.9. I want to see some Trump.
Lester, it's starting to get a lot quieter in this tabulation center, and that's because for the most part, they're almost done here. We're told by election officials. Tonight, Lester, it seems like we're seeing a very different Georgia than what we saw in 2022. Lester.
All right.
Because we're looking at an exit poll that shows Latino men broke for Trump by 10 points. They went for Biden by 23. That's a 33-point swing. How do you make sense of that?
Yeah, I think all of us are trying to make sense of that. Look, you know, this is one exit poll, so I'm not prepared to draw complete conclusions from this, but like, I think it's safe to say, right? We've seen enough evidence that there was a significant shift among Latinos.
We've got to make a call here, Secretary. This is NBC News projection in the state of Georgia. NBC News projects that Donald Trump will win in Georgia when all the votes are counted. There's the breakdown right now, 118,000 vote margin. But again, Donald Trump, the projected winner. This is a big call here on a night in which we've waited quite some time for some of these important battleground calls. Here's what the road to 270 looks like. Donald Trump drawing closer now to that magic number. He's at 246, Harris at 189.
Well, this means it's boo, wall, or bust for Kamala Harris. It's Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, or there is no path to 270 for her. So we'll continue to keep an eye on this as we await results.
And welcome back. That news is sinking in that Georgia will go into the Donald Trump column here tonight. Certainly a major piece on and putting Donald Trump even closer to that magic 270.
I was just looking over at Tom, who's doing the back of the envelope math here. So
I'm gaming
show
up
us
the
our
scenario
math.
here.
Yeah.
I just want to make this very simple for us here and also our viewers at home. So we projected Georgia and North Carolina. For former President Trump to go back to the White House, look at his number right here, 252. If he wins Pennsylvania, he's going back to the White House, 271. It's coming down to Pennsylvania right now for Republicans. What the math changes now for Kamala Harris, right? Because now she no longer has a Sun Belt strategy. She's lost Georgia. She's lost North Carolina. If she wins the entire blue wall, yes, she'll go back to the White House. That is still an option for her. Listen, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. She has to win all three. But it looks like this is the entire game for her right now, guys. By losing North Carolina, losing Georgia, things have just gotten much easier for former President Trump. We're going to be watching Pennsylvania more than ever before right now because those 19 electoral votes will put him over the top if we project that state for him. Guys?
It feels like 2016. Honestly, it feels like 2016. And just the path becoming smaller and smaller. There are still votes to be counted, and we saw a lot of enthusiasm today, and so it's possible that you have significant election day voting that could change this. But what I've noticed is just in county after county in Pennsylvania that he's been overperforming and that she's been underperforming what Biden and Trump did in 2020, and that's, you know, for Democrats has to be worrisome.
I hate to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but we have a call in the U.S. Senate that will change the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. NBC News now calling GOP control of the Senate.
That's what the... All right, we want to go to Harris headquarters, Cedric Richmond, who is, of course, the head of the DNC, about to address the crowd there. Let's listen in.
Good evening, Howard. Good evening, H. I want to say good evening to all of the Harris campaign, the campaign family. Thank you for all that you have done. Thank you for being here. We still have votes to count. We still have states that have not been called yet. So you won't hear from the vice president tonight. So thank you. We believe in you. May God bless you. May God keep you. And go HU and go Harris. Thank you all.
Richmond, who is, of course, the co-chair of the Harris campaign. I misspoke earlier. Apologies for that, saying that we will not hear from Kamala Harris tonight, but we will hear from her tomorrow. We've got...
I think it's important to note that this is a different year. There are still votes to be counted. You know, none of those battleground states have been counted, but it feels eerily similar to 2016.
The parallels are really striking.
There's the side-by-side picture. If you were just tuning into all this, I think the pictures speak loudly. On the left, the Harris campaign headquarters for the night as people are packing up and leaving, told they will not see the candidate tonight as they process some unhelpful trends for them. On the right side, the Trump gathering in West Palm Beach tonight, where we have seen dancing and celebration. Again, the race has not been called yet, but they, like everyone else watching, some interesting trend lines that seem to be pointing in that direction. We'll take a break here.
Savannah, we did just hear from Cedric Richmond making the announcement to the thousands who had gathered here. Frankly, many of them had already left as we approached 1 o'clock, saying that they would not hear from the Vice President Kamala Harris tonight, instead saying that she would speak to her supporters, not just here at Howard University, her alma mater, but to the nation as well, in an address that would take place at some point tomorrow. No specifics on when that would occur. A lot of votes still out there. No plans for any concessions, certainly at this point. But I can tell you, in conversations we've had with a series of individuals, including a Democrat who was attending a donor event that was taking place at one of the glitzy hotels not far from where we are here in Washington, D.C., they say the atmosphere there was like a funeral. Another person said that the situation, in their words, was just, quote, not good right now. We did hear earlier from Jen O'Malley-Dillon. She is the campaign chair. She had what was in effect a sort of pep talk for the forces, the campaign staff, telling them all to get some sleep and that they would come back and finish this off strong tomorrow. So that's effectively where things are at the end of the evening. But I got to tell you, Savannah, on a day when so many those close to Kamala Harris really felt like they had the momentum, they felt like the vibes were on their side, it quickly appeared clear that, you know, despite her effort to say that we're not going back, that they may be returning to the figures that haunted Democrats back in 2016, where they just didn't have enough to defeat Donald Trump that go around. So many blank stares, glum faces, people not so much holding back tears, but certainly unable to crack a smile here. They had been handing out American flags early on. As some of the early numbers were out, they were cheering and waving those flags. But as the night progressed and they watched the returns come in, no more waving flags. In fact, they asked for the television to be muted here with the returns, with the exception of Hawaii, Colorado, other places that Harris won. They turned them on and got cheers for that. Instead, they blasted music to try to sort of distract from the situation, try to give a little pick-me-up to the people here.
All right, Peter, thank you so much. Want to go over to Gary?
Yeah, Savannah, Trump supporters reveling in the news that they're getting here in this ballroom just over the last half hour or so. Huge cheers in this room as the networks called Georgia for the former president, and a loud chorus of boos when Cedric Richmond took the stage in Washington to announce that Vice President Harris would not be speaking. There has been movement from Mar-a-Lago across the Intercoastal Waterway towards West Palm Beach of Trump supporters. The party there emptying out a lot of the folks he had been with. Governor Burgum, for example, other close Trump aides and allies making their way across the street. Still no sign of the former president here yet, Savannah.
Philadelphia County, this is where she closed out her campaign with Lady Gaga and Oprah as well. There's still a lot of vote left to be counted, 20% or so. 81% was where Biden was at. She's at 78. And finally, Bucks County here. Trump has flipped this right now. There's still about 30% of the vote is out, 69%. He had 51. Biden did in 2020. Trump tonight with 50%. Still some vote to be counted there. But those aren't promising numbers in the collar counties right now. And the bellwethers, one in the east, one in the west, showing signs that Pennsylvania could turn red. Still a lot of vote out, guys. But this may be one of the reasons, and we don't know why Vice President Harris decided not to speak tonight, but this may be one of the reasons why the trend lines in Pennsylvania, from what we're seeing, if she doesn't win Pennsylvania, there is no longer a path for her. Right.
And you're seeing some
counties. Trump is overperforming. Harris is underperforming the counties she needs to win, guys.
Remember, if she doesn't win Pennsylvania, the other states don't matter. If he wins Pennsylvania, he goes to the White House.
Right. Whether it's a call or not, it functionally is. I don't know. The minute if we call Pennsylvania tonight, does he get to 270? I think so.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's right.
That's it.
That's right.
So
That's why it's bowl game. I mean, that's
yes,
it. So.
And they're counting fast in Pennsylvania tonight as well. We're coming up.
scoring 270 electoral votes.
Okay, let's see the battlegrounds. Pennsylvania, we just discussed it. Too close to call right now with 92% of the vote in. Same story in Michigan, but we've been discussing how some of the trend lines are not positive for the vice president tonight. Michigan too close to call.
Bucks County goes, we go. And we spent more time and resources there, and the Harris campaign did too. They had huge operations on the ground. The fact that they're not going to win Bucks County is really difficult and starts to say to folks, hey, you know, we have a problem here. The other thing is there just may not be enough turnout in Philly to get there. And I've spent my entire adult life waiting for Philly to come in. I just have anger. I hate the Eagles.
All right, relax. Hey.
What is true is Donald Trump has always been underestimated by Democrats and has always figured out a way to juice turnout in ways that we thought were both abhorrent and didn't make sense to Democrats, but clearly has worked tonight. And this is that was the story of 2016, and it is a story of tonight.
You know what's interesting to me? Any word on whether we will hear from the former president?
We will, Savannah, and soon, I'm told by a campaign official, Donald Trump is on his way across from Mar-a-Lago to here in West Palm Beach, and he is expected to speak soon. Now, what soon means is a little bit of a open to interpretation, but Trump himself made it very clear earlier today, he does not have a lot of patience with this vote counting process. He wants this to be over tonight. He thought earlier today it would be over tonight. And it was his desire to speak tonight. This ballroom is full. Secret Service starting to kind of close the doors, urge people to get in. They're cranking up the music, Savannah. I do not think it will be long until we hear from former President Trump.
And that will be an interesting situation because if assuming the status quo exists, he will not have been called as the next president.
Well, we will recall that he declared victory in 2020 when, in fact, he lost. So we'll see what his verbiage is here. What are you going to say?
I was going to say I've been speaking to some of his allies, and there's sort of this divide about how he should approach this night. And some of them are saying you should be very aggressive. You should get out there and claim victory if, in fact, you think that's where this is headed. Others are saying, look, let's just walk a very fine line. I'll be really curious to see what he says, because this election, unlike 2020, the numbers are on his side. And again, we still have a lot of votes that need to be counted, so we don't know what the ultimate conclusion is going to be. But it's notable he's coming out in Harris.
Yeah, to be clear, in 2020, he declared victory. The race hadn't been called one way or the other. He hadn't lost yet. He lost 5 days later.
First of all, his campaign has made it very clear that he would speak when they felt he was well on his way to 270 electoral votes. They were very clear that they didn't feel compelled to wait until the race had been called. But when they felt confident in his path, he would speak. And so I think that's what we're going to see now. Trump was asked today what his message is going to be to the millions, tens of millions of people who will have voted for Kamala Harris if he speaks after a victory. Would he give a unifying message? Trump said that he would, but described this as a broken country and said it would be important to try to fix it. A unifying message has not been Trump's strength, candidly, across his political career.
Campaign. Claire, let me start with you. We may hear, Donald Trump sooner than later. What can he say that will make it a less bitter moment for those on the left?
Oh boy, that's a really hard question. First of all, do I think he will? Will he try to reach out and be a unifier and try to acknowledge that this country is divided, incredibly divided? I don't think he will. That's not who he is. That's not how he got elected. And I don't know him. You could probably answer this better than I could, but it doesn't seem like to me that this would be the moment where he would not try to be his authentic self, which is I'm a marauder, I'm a disruptor, I'm somebody who I'm going to be your fighter against everything you hate about government.
I mean, let's remember we have seen him on the national stage for 8 years. I mean, I covered him in the White House. We covered him in the White House together. We covered him in the campaign. We know who this person is. He's been president before. He's been a presidential candidate before, and we know what his message tends to be. He's done it over and over in this campaign, and that is a message that is darker, that casts America as a dangerous place, a place that only he can fix. Somebody who, as we talk about rhetoric, just called Nancy Pelosi as crazy as a bedbug just recently, right? So let's just remember that is, I think, some of the tone. Now, we may see tonight him look to make I'm not even going to say the word pivot, but perhaps extend an olive branch. Maybe. I mean, listen, we're not, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do think there's a pattern of history.
To that point, I mean, remember after the horrific assassination attempt against him, the Republican National Convention, and all of the reporting, in fact, everything that he was saying was,
He himself said it.
He said it, yes. He said, I am going to deliver a unifying speech. And it was for part of the speech, but then it quickly became a very familiar, almost speech that you would hear on the campaign trail.
Well, that's what he ran for, and is perhaps going to prevail on that very way of being. I don't know that he would have any incentive to change unless, he had felt in the moment some magnanimity towards.
I will make one bold prediction, though, Savannah.
Yeah.
I predict that he won't say that anybody cheated.
Well, but remember, though, even after he won election in 2016, he still made unfounded claims of voter fraud. So win or lose, it is something that he has a pattern of doing. Just to speak to that, I mean, again, we don't have to rehash all of it here, and we're still waiting for Pennsylvania to be called, but he is somebody who has called journalists the enemies of the people. Just at a rally recently, he talked about being surrounded by bulletproof glass, and that if somebody wanted to come after him in a attempted assassination again, they'd have to shoot through the media first, and he'd be okay with that. His campaign tried to suggest that's not what he said, but that is the kind of language that we have heard from him consistently.
And remember how he launched his campaign vowing retribution. And in recent weeks and days, we've heard him talk about his political rivals as being the enemy from within. His vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, has spent a lot of time answering for that in interviews that he has done.
Well, just to bring everybody up to date, 1:30 on the East Coast, and we are awaiting Donald Trump, who's expected to speak at the Trump headquarters in West Palm Beach, Florida. Battlegrounds remain to be called, and so there still is a narrow path, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania for Kamala Harris. But the trend lines, and the reason you're hearing this tone from Democrats and Republicans alike, is the trend lines are indicating that it will be a Trump victory, but this has not been called yet. So you have the audience there waiting to hear from the former president. These are the uncalled battleground states. Those are the trend lines that we're talking about. Pennsylvania, a healthy Trump margin there with 94% of the vote in. Those states out west, Arizona and Nevada.
I've been hearing from my friends that are in Europe. They're very worried about the lines of those countries being redrawn fairly quickly.
You mean Ukraine?
Yes, and more. You know, Orban and other autocrats that now will feel this is a green light. I think NATO will be greatly diminished. I think our European allies will be very, very nervous. You know, so that's another whole piece of this. So
let's be clear. If the Republicans hold on to the House, they have the Senate. If they win the White House, you have an ideological 6-3 Supreme Court. You will have the Republicans in charge of every branch of government in this country.
And not to raise this specter, but it is possible that if Donald Trump wins another term, if that happens, and we have not called Pennsylvania or the race yet, so big ifs here. But
this is Trump support among Latino voters in Pennsylvania. Look at this number. 2020, 27%. In 2024, 41%. It was just not Latino voters. And again, I know this could change. These are early exit polls. So look at the breakdown here. White, 55, 57. But even black voters, he grew his margins there from 2020 to 2024. And again, that Latino margin, that spread right there. And I bring this up because we were talking a lot about that Madison Square Garden rally, that joke that was made about Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans and how it would affect the race and how it would affect what happened in Pennsylvania. So far, we have not seen it have any tremendous effect. Again, when you see a number like that in Bucks County, you know it's going to be a tough night for Democrats.
And as we talk about counties, and that's what made his win in Pennsylvania so different.
Everyone's speechless here. I guess it really is 1:40 in the morning, except for they're not speechless. They're cheering there at Trump headquarters.
I think we can go
West
there.
Palm. Yeah, I think we must be getting close to that moment with Donald Trump. His motorcade, we saw it coming, so I think...
yeah, Garrett Haake is there.
Yeah, he's there. We can listen to him and hear what the crowd is hearing.
Yeah. Savannah, I can tell you right now, the anticipation far outpaces the available information about what Donald Trump will say and when he will say it. They're broadcasting another network in here, and we're getting a lot of cheers from a crowd who is anticipating a victory speech. I can tell you.
Yeah, I think most accurate to say that we are shutting it down at this point, shy of 2 o'clock here. We're the only ones left, a matter of reporters here who are sort of bundling up their gear in anticipation of the vice president returning to Howard University, her alma mater, as we were told. I guess it's later today. She'll be speaking today, Wednesday, not just to her supporters, but to a national audience as well. Obviously, this thing isn't done yet, but certainly based on the expressions we saw, the information we're getting from those in and around the Harris campaign, it doesn't feel like a winning night for them, a successful campaign. We heard a funeral type atmosphere from those top donors who were gathered at a hotel not far from here. Kamala Harris never arrived at this location.
Florida, we see a celebratory atmosphere there. People, cheering and hugging, and it looks like a victory party. And when the former president steps out, perhaps that's exactly what it will be. However, NBC News has not projected or made those final calls. Let's take a pause. Speaking of, first of all, Elon Musk Musk hours ago tweeted or X'd or whatever you call it now, game, set, match. So he's already been feeling that victory. But let's talk about RFK, Robert F.
Well, and it's striking because so many of the people who served in his administration have said he's unfit to serve. And so they won't be returning, obviously. And we spent a fair amount of time talking about that in recent weeks, all of the people who called him, for example, a fascist. I do think it's worth zooming out a little bit and just acknowledging the history-making moment that we are witnessing.
What do you think of your old boss, former Vice President Mike Pence, is thinking? He did not endorse Donald Trump and, of course, famously, did his constitutional duty on January 6th to the chance of hang Mike Pence. What do you think he's thinking right now?
I think he's probably thinking about it from a policy standpoint. I mean, the campaign is over. That decision has been made by the American people. And so I think line and was elected by the people of America to be the president of the United States.
Claire, you had a thought, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think one of the things that a lot of people will be looking at is the military. You know, we have a civilian-controlled military in the United States, but there is a deep ethos in the military, especially in the leadership, about the separation of politics and the military. And Trump at times tried to blur that line and was frustrated, I think, because he could not get the military to do what he thought they ought to do when they ought to do it sometimes. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the Pentagon handles this, because there are so many strong leaders in our military, and they have come up through the ranks, and they have transferred their families all over the world, and they have learned every part of military leadership. And I think there could be some bumps in the road as to how he handles the military and who he puts in charge,
or his campaign. And
we've got an important call to make here.
Moments away from calling one of the key
battlegrounds. Stand by.
battlegrounds.
Yes, NBC News can now project that Donald Trump will win in the state of Pennsylvania. 19 electoral votes. Here's where it stands right now. Donald Trump out in front, difference of 188,000 votes, 95% of the vote in Pennsylvania, and that goes in the Donald Trump column.
And with that, it's expected that he will have the 270 votes he needs. I see you puzzling over there. It's because of Nebraska. Yeah.
Going, okay, am I going crazy?
No.
Because we haven't called Alaska yet, and that's why it's 266. But once Alaska gets called and Nebraska, you can see former President Trump, he had to get to 270. He's likely to get to 272, if not higher. We still haven't called Wisconsin or Michigan as well, but he is on his way. NBC News projecting him on his way back to the White House.
And we were told, right now, I'm not quite sure what they're listening to, but they have been partying for quite some time.
Well, this is history. Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States, as he was the 45th president of the United States, with the convincing sweep of several battleground states. Several battleground states still not decided, but the magic number of 270 electoral votes has been reached. Seen at Trump headquarters in West Palm Beach, as Donald J. Trump once again will assume the presidency on January 20th. The United States Senate will be in Republican hands. Democrats have lost control of the Senate, and the fate of the House of Representatives, currently in Republican hands, also in question. Democrats just need...
We heard from them, of course. It was Cedric Richmond taking the stage. That memo had suggested to staffers, listen, we've got the blue wall. We're going to wait and see turnout in Philadelphia. We have now called Pennsylvania. That is incredibly significant here. And so do we hear from, if not her, as we don't expect to, the campaign tonight? And then obviously, what are we going to hear when former President Trump himself takes the stage there down in Palm Beach?
And will she call him to concede? I mean, that's my question.
But there was, in some ways, an air of inevitability around Hillary Clinton that just didn't exist around Kamala Harris. She wasn't even supposed to be on the top of this ticket 6 months ago, right? So it was a very different vibe coming into this. She talked about, and her campaign cast her as the underdog here in this race, not as the sort of heir apparent, if you will. So
Harris's favorable rating, 48%. Donald Trump's, 44%.
That's right.
People like him less, And it appears
but the people who liked
into
him,
an office.
the people who liked him showed up here, and maybe others as well. And look at Joe Biden's approval rating too. I do think that comes into play here. His favorability at 41%.
Well, they may not like him, but they like what he says.
Well,
they like his policies.
I talk to voters all the time that say, I can't stand him. I don't like the way he picks on people. I don't like his tweets. I don't like the way that he picks on people that aren't like him, but I love his policies.
But in his mind, does that validate his worst instincts now? I mean, will the lesson for him of this election be, you know, course works?
Well, yeah, that, and also, it doesn't matter, Lester, right?
Here's Donald Trump now coming out.
Thank you very much.
Former President Trump making about 25 minutes worth of remarks, essentially acknowledging that he has been called by other networks, not this one so far, as the next president of the United States, coming out with family and supporters there, a crowd that had waited a considerable amount of time, but obviously eager and happy about the outcome of the evening. As we said, NBC News has not projected that he is over the top yet, but he has a clear path to victory and the White House at this point.
We have not called the race for president for him. We have called the race for Pennsylvania for him, and that appears to be the critical key for him to get to 270 at some point throughout the course of the early evening. He has not officially won the popular vote yet, although he is leading on that front. We have not officially called control of the House of Representatives yet. That could take a while. He clearly feels confident about that, saying that they've won. Again, that is not the case just yet. The Republicans do have control of the Senate, but you heard former President Trump there say that we have an unprecedented and powerful mandate at this historic moment here. He is now, when we officially call the race, would be the oldest president ever elected, only the second president elected to a non-consecutive term. You saw him basking in the moment. At one point, he looked around and said something like, "Isn't this crazy?" I mean, he looked around and said that this even happened. He was extremely confident, at least publicly projecting that.
And he called it the greatest political comeback in the history of this country. He might not be wrong if you think about that. He survived 2 assassination attempts, right? One that was very close. 90 criminal accounts, right? He was in court throughout his campaign. He was primaried, won that primary, fought all those criminal cases. A lot of them are still ongoing right now. Again, survives the assassination attempts, loses his mother-in-law. A lot happened to him over the last 2 years. And here we are at this moment again where it looks like he's on his way to re-election.
Yeah, he'll be, he's supposed to be sentenced, I think, the 26th of November on felony charges.
And that, even saying that sentence here, right, in this moment, is unprecedented.
You have to wonder, though, and I think we'll have to go back and look. I mean, was that what turned it for him on some level?
He would tell you that it is.
Yeah,
the minute he started getting indicted, especially that New York case that was
fundraising numbers went up.
His poll numbers went up. I mean, you could see the lines, the graph. I mean, Governor DeSantis thought he was on his way to the nomination. He was leading in all the polls. All the criminal indictments start, and his numbers start to shoot up. Democrats, even though they said they were following the letter of the law, some Democrats, Republicans will say, played politics with the law, and they went after him for political reasons. That might have been the biggest political miscalculation in the history of our country.
And you talk to a lot of Democrats, they wonder if perhaps it took the Department of Justice just too long to get this process moving. I mean, if you talk to the folks that sat on the January 6th Select Committee, they wanted the DOJ to move a lot faster than they did. It wasn't until the Select Committee had done all of its work and then handed those referrals over to the Department of Justice that they moved specifically on the cases related to January 6th. And by that point, we were already into the campaign season. It became a political issue instead of a legal issue, and that may be something that they look back on and regret.
It was really the big X factor hanging over this entire race. How?
And at this moment, I think there is, by all accounts and by the reporting that our teams are doing, a bit of a moment of shell shock here for Democrats, for folks who had worked to try to turn out the vote for Vice President Kamala Harris, who had hoped that tonight would be history-making in a very different kind of way, that instead of seeing, of course, Donald Trump elected, that the nation would see its first female president, its first president who was a woman of color. That is, by the math that you and Tom just laid out looks to not be the case once Donald Trump does hit 270 electoral college votes. I'm struck.
As you can see there, Vice President Kamala Harris stuck at 219 electoral votes. We had spent so much time talking about these battleground states over the past few weeks and months. So far, heretofore, the vice president hasn't picked up a single one.
Not a single one of the 7 that we've been following so closely. There are parties going on around the country right now for President Donald Trump. There are people out there celebrating.
Yeah.
I think it's important to acknowledge that. Sure. This is a big night for half the country and a sort of dismal night for the other half.
We heard she is expected to address her supporters, to address the country at some point tomorrow. But there had been, as you know, this huge party planned on the campus of Howard University. It was a party that never happened. But again,
the numbers are there. I think now the question is, how much over 270 is he going to get?
To be clear for people maybe just joining at this hour, the numbers are not there for Harris.
They're just not there for Harris, and it doesn't look like. And what is in the blue wall, where she's coming up short, are in the cities. And what was interesting is during the early vote, you know, they were downplaying that, well, because the early vote showed rural voters came out big, suburban voters came out pretty big, but the urban numbers were down across the board, and they thought they were going to make it up on Election Day. They were looking at how much time she spent in Philadelphia even just 24 hours ago. But Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Detroit, it's a familiar, this is the same story from 2016.
Yeah.
Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Detroit. Turnout numbers are down there. Turnout in the red counties, through the roof.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, it's interesting because North Carolina, not that much of a surprise, perhaps. How much time, to your point, that she spent in Pennsylvania, 3 rallies just yesterday alone, the amount of money both campaigns spent in Pennsylvania, you know, obviously they'll, you know, for the next hours, days, weeks, they'll be looking at precisely what happened there. But based on some of the exit polling that we've seen so far, based on some of the conversations that I know you guys have had there with folks from Pennsylvania, what do we know about what happened there?
What's so stunning is that her events in those places drew big crowds. It may be a function of misjudging some of the electorate. It may be those who thought she was doing well, didn't engage.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot to dissect.
Yeah, if you
thought she was doing well, didn't engage.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot to dissect.
Joe Biden was the driver of Donald Trump's comeback tonight. His unpopularity, whether, you know, could more have been done, all sorts of things, but that is the driver of tonight.
And let's take a look at the road to 270. You see the map there, a lot of red on that map, including Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. And then let's take a look at Congress.
Let's take a look at the upper chamber here. This is where things stand. Republicans projected to take control of the Senate at this hour. Not much of a surprise there in the upper chamber. Lots of questions, of course, at this hour about what's going to happen in the House of Representatives. As you can see there, net gain so far for Republicans of 3, but there are still some 5-6 dozen uncalled races there in the House. Ryan Nobles, we spent some time talking about Hakeem Jeffries probably paying very close attention to our count there in the House. Hakeem Jeffries would become the first black Speaker of the House if Democrats are able to
And I really do have to caution our viewers that it could be days, maybe weeks before we know who wins the House of Representatives. For instance, just a few minutes ago, we called Michigan 7 for the Republican there. That's Alyssa Slotkin's old seat. I would say right now, as it stands, there's just as much chance that Republicans win the House as there is that Democrats win the House. It's literally a 50-50 race right now. But
show us how former President Trump gets there.
Or it might be easier to show us how he can't get there.
Yeah. You said there's no way.
There really is. I mean, we know she's going to win it because we know how much. Look at this change, okay? Joe Biden won Illinois by nearly 18 points.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris is going to win it probably by 5 once all is said and done. Okay.
You have been following the Kamala Harris campaign since it launched. Any idea at this point, Yamiche, based on the conversations that you've been having with folks inside that campaign, when did it take a turn for the vice president? When did they know she was in trouble?
It's a key question, Craig. I was talking to Harris officials all night, and they really began the night very confident, feeling very joyful. I heard the idea that they were cautiously optimistic, and the vice president has been saying for the last 3 days that she felt like she had the momentum in this race and that she was going to win. That's what she was telling crowds. But around 10:30, when it started becoming very clear that former President Trump was making gains, and exit polls were showing that he was overperforming in key areas, including in North Carolina and Georgia, it became clear to the Harris campaign aides that I was talking to that she was in trouble. And I started hearing words like deflated. I started hearing words like it feels like a funeral here, especially at Howard University, which was her alma mater. There were hundreds, thousands of people gathered there. They started getting very quiet. They started being very sort of blank stares, started forming on people's faces. And then over the course of the last few hours, including just in the last hours as I've been texting people with former President Trump winning Pennsylvania, people are telling me now that they're pivoting toward looking at how to deal with Trump's policies and how to find love for people that they might disagree with. So definitely a change here.
It's worth saying that on that map, there is really not a path at this point for Vice President Harris to come out on top. It really is Trump's. This election obviously dramatically changes things for both parties, and with that,
Fixing my hair. Look what the cat dragged in. We had a late night. Well, I believe you call it an early morning. Donald Trump will return to the White House. That's the headline. The 47th president of the United States, the now president-elect for a second time, right now sitting at 276 electoral votes. The state of Wisconsin putting him over the top officially here at NBC News about an hour ago.
Just a couple of minutes ago. I'm thinking, is there any battleground county where she outperformed Joe Biden? Is there a single battleground county where she actually did better than President Biden did here? So I checked in with a source. You may know him, Steve Granacki. There's a couple, the suburbs of Atlanta and like one county in Pennsylvania, but overwhelmingly, there is not a place where she did better than Joe Biden in this race.
And I think Hallie hits on a really critical point. Democrats are waking up this morning and asking, what do they need to do to win again? One Democrat put it to me this way: there needs to be a reckoning, that the current leadership needs to think seriously about not just passing the baton, but talking about politics differently and finding and meeting voters where they are. This lawmaker said, right now, we're not doing that. And that is why they believe Donald Trump won.
A vice president to an unpopular president running for essentially a second term is almost never successful.
And trying to figure out how to navigate some distance from him while still being unwilling to break from him completely. That was part of it, too.
It was the biggest challenge of her campaign.
Well, we'll have hours to discuss it.
Yes, we will. All right, guys, let's turn.
Last night at Howard University, Kamala Harris's alma mater, it started as sort of a joyful, optimistic scene, but as the results came in, as polls closed around the country, the scene there really dramatically changed quickly. A much more somber scene, glum looks, blank faces staring at the giant screen there. Ultimately, they turned off the audio on the massive monitor and turned music on to try to buoy the spirits of those in attendance. We do expect to hear, as you noted, from Vice President Harris at some point later today, speaking at Howard University, we were told, both to her supporters and to address the nation as well. There was a party elsewhere in town for her donors. The situation there was described as a funeral.
So let's look at that. For all of the talk about the polling ties, in the end, this is a pretty decisive victory for Donald Trump. Take us inside it.
Yeah, a couple ways to look at it, Savannah. You see some of these battlegrounds still, Michigan, Nevada, Arizona, not called. Trump is ahead in all three of those. There's a very good chance Trump is going to go 7 for 7 in the core battleground states. But the victory he's put up here goes beyond those battleground states. These are the electoral votes. Let's flip it over and show you what the popular vote looks like right now. And you can see Trump right now with an outright majority of the popular vote, an advantage of more than 5 million votes nationally over Kamala Harris. And where that comes from is some states we don't talk about much, but big states, states like New York. Now, Kamala Harris is going to win here by about 11 points, but just check out what this is in terms of a difference from 2020. That's cut in half from Joe Biden's margin. If you looked inside New York City here, especially the working class areas, the outer boroughs of New York City.
The Bronx.
There you go. Some major gains for Trump there that have really kind of been unthinkable for Republicans for a long time. You see it, too, these kinds of gains in a state like New Jersey. You see it in a state like Maryland. They're still blue, but they're a lot less blue. You see it in a state like Illinois, look at this one, 51-47. We're over 90% of the vote, and Harris is going to win. She's not winning like Joe Biden did just 4 years ago. 17 points right there. So you start getting those gains for Donald Trump in those big blue states. I mean, that adds up to millions of votes. That's why he has this popular vote advantage. That's why I think there's a very good chance he's going to end up winning the popular vote for the first time, and it would be the first time in 20 years since George W. Bush, 2004, that a Republican has won the national popular vote.
All right, Steve, we have lots to unpack here. We'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much.